Hey guys, tonight we're gliding back to a time when fortunes bloomed from the soil, quite literally, and one of the most absurd economic frenzies in history sprouted from a single humble flower. You're in the Netherlands now. The year? Sometime in the early 1600s. A chilly mist rolls across the narrow canals, flickering lanterns cast golden halos on cobblestone streets, and somewhere nearby, a merchant just sold his life savings for a flower bulb he won't see for another 6 months. You, on the other hand, are just arriving, boots soggy, breath visible, and thoughts foggy. The scent of wood smoke clings to the air, and a faint breeze carries the tang of brine from the sea. This isn't the Dutch Golden Age you've read about in coffee table books filled with glossy Rembrandt paintings. No, this is a quieter corner of history, one soaked in peat, lined with soggy ledgers, and yes, filled with very passionate flower gossip. You probably won't survive this economy, by the way. One false move and you could trade your last pair of shoes for a rotting bulb that never even sprouts. But let's not worry about that right now. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's twilight in Amsterdam. The tall, narrow houses lean slightly over the canals like tired old men. You cross a bridge, quiet except for the distant clop of wooden shoes, and duck beneath an arch where a boatman is tying up a flat-bottomed barge filled with sacks. You glance over. They aren't grain or spices or even salted fish. They're bulbs. Dozens of them, wrapped carefully in straw like precious glass. In a city buzzing with trade, spices from Java, silks from Persia, furs from Russia, one little flower has found its way to the very center of Dutch obsession, the tulip. These aren't the garden-center tulips you know. Not yet. They're wild, vivid, flame-striped things, strange and alien. Imported from the Ottoman Empire, particularly the high-altitude regions of Central Asia, tulips first arrived in Europe through medical gardens and academic exchanges. But they didn't stay scholarly for long. Historians still argue whether the tulip first caught on because of its rare coloring or because someone important claimed it meant wealth. Maybe it was both. Regardless, by the early 1600s, you can't swing a sack of herring without hitting someone obsessed with tulips. As you walk the canals, you overhear it. Two elderly men whispering about a broken bulb in Leiden that bloomed in stripes. A maid giggling about her master trading his silver for a flower he had to keep in the dark. A boy running past you, holding what looks like a turnip wrapped in linen, his face lit up like he's just won the lottery. You follow him into a flower market, not one with actual flowers, mind you. That would make too much sense. This one's all promises. Paper contracts. Names on lists. The bulbs themselves? Many of them are still underground. Some are still in the minds of hopeful breeders. And yet prices are rising like dough in a bakery window. You pass a stall where a bearded man in a floppy hat is explaining that one bulb will bloom to resemble the tongues of flame licking the edge of a gold coin. He has no sample. He doesn't need one. Trust the name, he says, tapping his ledger. And you begin to notice, these flowers have names like opera characters. Semper Augustus, Viceroy, Generalissimo. Some are Latin, some French, some invented. All sound expensive. You duck into a tavern, because naturally this much flower talk makes a person thirsty, and order a dark beer in a wooden mug. Behind you a fire crackles. At a corner table, a group of men are loudly comparing bulbs. One boasts that his tulip once bloomed 2 weeks early. Another claims his cousin in Harlem crossed 2 streaked varieties to get something entirely ghostly. You listen, slightly buzzed, as someone explains how a noble family traded 2 horses for barrels of beer, a suit of clothes, and a painting for a single bulb. You think they're joking. They are not. You try not to laugh. The barkeep, drying mugs, leans over. "You got any bulbs?" he asks. You shake your head. He nods, then winks. "Don't worry. You'll change your mind. Everyone does. Outside, bells toll. A ship creaks at the dock. Somewhere a dog barks at its own echo. And across this otherwise reasonable city, more and more people are starting to believe, deeply and sincerely, that tulips might just be the future. You step out of the tavern and the mist has thickened, wrapping the canal streets in a gauzy silence. Your boots slap softly on wet stone as you head toward one of the city's quieter neighborhoods, where flickering lanterns reveal rows of tall townhouses and small greenhouses tucked in back courtyards. You're on your way to meet someone who, according to the barkeep, knows his roots. The door creaks open before you knock. "Come in before the spores catch you," says a voice that somehow manages to sound both cheerful and ominous. Inside, the warmth hits you like a wool blanket. The scent of damp earth and sweet rot fills the room. Bulbs sit everywhere, in wooden trays tucked in ceramic pots, dangling from hooks and little nets like onions. You realize the man in front of you is no ordinary gardener. He's a botanist, a breeder, and in some ways an artist. He introduces himself as Peter. His hands are stained, his eyes alight with excitement. He holds up a bulb as if showing off a gem. "This," he says dramatically, "is supposed to bloom with violet edges and yellow flame. I've named it Veritas Luctuosa, mournful truth." You blink. "But how do you know?" "I don't," he grins. "That's the thrill. Tulip bulbs are mysterious things. Most won't bloom for months. And the real drama? The broken ones, the ones with streaks and stripes, those are caused by a virus. A literal infection. Botanists don't understand that yet, of course. They just know the effect is breathtaking, unpredictable, and frustratingly non-heritable. Historians still argue whether the Dutch knew they were chasing a plant disease, or if they simply thought God had dipped these petals in magic. Either way, by the early 1600s, the tulip had become more than a flower. It was a canvas for social status. Peter leads you to a back room. Here, shelves are lined with parchment, sketches of imagined blooms, lists of parent bulbs, observations about shape, bloom time, petal curl. One entry catches your eye: crossed lacrimosa with aurora puncta, child may bloom weeping. It's all very poetic, and also very subjective, which is exactly why naming a bulb was an act of ego. You didn't just grow a flower, you declared its future identity, gave it a dramatic Latin name, and waited to see if it lived up to your daydreams. If it did, you were a genius. If it didn't, you renamed it and tried again. You ask Peter how many of his bulbs have bloomed as expected. He laughs and says, "None. That's why I keep planting them." But he's not in it for profit, or at least not directly. He breeds for bragging rights. In his circle of fellow cultivators, the prestige isn't in selling. It's in being the first to create something so unique that it inspires envy, imitations, and maybe even a poem or two. You imagine these men, cloaked in fur and pipe smoke, trading bulbs and sonnets like Renaissance Pokemon cards. In one corner of Peter's study, there's a little framed letter. You lean closer. It's from a nobleman in Haarlem, dated 1633, praising Peter for birthing a blossom worthy of royal brows. The bulb in question? Long dead. But the letter remains, pressed and preserved. You're beginning to understand. In the right circles, tulips are status. Conversation starters. Proof of taste. Not unlike buying a weird designer lamp today and insisting it's post-structural. And the best part? Even if the flower never blooms, you can still talk about it. Peter walks you to the door, handing you a bulb wrapped in soft cloth. "Plant it or don't," he says. "Maybe just tell people you did." You nod solemnly as if accepting a sacred duty. Outside, the wind has picked up. The canals ripple. You tuck the bulb into your coat like a smuggler. And somewhere in Amsterdam tonight, there's probably a dinner party where three men are loudly debating whether Veritas Luctuosa bloomed too early, or whether Peter even had it at all. You walk past a bookshop where pamphlets about tulip varieties fill the window. Titles like The Art of Blooming and On the Noble Flame of Spring call out in curling script. Next to them, a pamphlet about naming conventions complete with mock-serious rules. No more than 3 Latin words. Must inspire awe. Preferably sound like a battle cry or a soft cry of grief. It's a culture now. You pass a man scolding his son not for muddy shoes but for mixing up 2 bulbs on the windowsill. That was supposed to be rubra delirium, he says, genuinely distressed. In your rented room that night you placed the bulb on the sill. It doesn't look like much, but you know better now. In this world it could be your ticket to infamy, or just a strangely poetic hobby that eats your savings. Either way the city sleeps. And somewhere beneath the soil something strange is starting to grow. Morning arrives in a hush. The fog hasn't lifted, and the light outside your window is the kind that doesn't so much shine as gently suggest that the sun still exists. You stir in your bed, sit up slowly and eye the bulb on your windowsill. It hasn't changed. Of course it hasn't. But part of you still half expects it to glow faintly or hum a little tune. That's what this city does. It makes you believe in the absurd. You head out, scarf tucked tight, and make your way toward the wealthier part of town. Today you're meeting a collector. Not a grower, not a botanist, but one of the people who buy bulbs purely for the prestige. Her name is Magdalena Van Horn, and her townhouse looms over the street like a grandmother who doesn't approve of your posture. Inside it smells faintly of beeswax and expensive boredom. She greets you in a velvet robe the color of cranberry jam and motions for you to follow her into a parlor where the windows are practically groaning with sunlight, even on this gray day. In the center of the room is a tulip. It's blooming in a small ceramic pot, perfectly centered on a polished table. The petals are striped like fire, and it leans ever so slightly toward the window, as if it, too, craves attention. Semper Augustus, she says, her voice somewhere between pride and possession. You nod, even though you're not entirely sure what you're nodding at. Semper Augustus is the Mona Lisa of tulips. Historians still argue whether any true originals ever existed, or if every real one was just a very good copy with an even better story. But in this world, facts are sometimes less important than the confidence with which you present them. Magdalena doesn't just collect tulips, she curates their reputations. You notice a small book beside the pot, the Rarity Ledger. Each of her bulbs has an entry: name, origin, previous owners, estimated bloom date, color forecast, and something she calls elegance ranking. This one, she says, tapping the page, was once sold for a canal house in Harlem. You almost spit out your tea. She's not kidding. And yet, here it is, growing in her sunroom beside a slightly wilted fern and a painting of a cat in a hat. The collecting of tulips has taken on a life of its own. Some collectors, like Magdalena, display theirs like religious relics. Others keep them hidden, known only to fellow enthusiasts. Some even rent viewing appointments. Yes, you heard that right. You pay to look at a tulip, preferably just before it blooms. There are scheduled unveilings, candlelit evenings, whispered rumors about the one with the 3 stripes and the black edge. You wander through Magdalena's house and find a hallway where paintings of tulips, rendered larger than life, line the walls. Each one labeled with calligraphy more dramatic than a royal decree. Lacrima florens cor ignitum tenebra lux. You ask her if she's ever planted any of them herself. She looks scandalized. And get dirt on my hands? Heavens no. Her bulbs arrive by courier, hand-delivered in velvet-lined boxes. Her gardener does the actual planting, and only after consulting a calendar designed to align bloom dates with dinner parties and social events. In the drawing room, another guest arrives. A portly gentleman with an exaggerated mustache and the air of someone who's deeply impressed with his own coat. He greets Magdalena with a deep bow and presents her with a box. Inside, another bulb. Smaller than the one you received from Peter, but labeled in precise lettering. Luna desiderata. You must see it bloom, he whispers as if sharing a secret about a royal affair. She clutches the box like it's an engagement ring. You begin to understand that tulips in this world are not just flowers. They're theater, a social language, a form of polite warfare between people too rich to bicker about money but more than willing to duel over petals. You ask if there's any kind of standard measurement, any way to verify a bulb's lineage or value. Magdalena just chuckles and says, "Darling, if you need proof, you're in the wrong garden." And that's the crux of it. The tulip world thrives not on certainty but on desire. The rarity is often unproven, the lineage hearsay, the price inflated by whispers and well-placed flattery. It's less of a market and more of a masquerade. And no one wants the music to stop. As you leave her home, you notice one last thing. A tiny portrait on her mantel, not of family but of a single tulip, her very first. The name beneath it reads, Vita Speciosa. She tells you she bought it in 1629 and never saw it bloom. It died of rot within weeks. And yet she's kept its memory alive, framed, titled, mythologized. Because in 17th century Amsterdam, the story of the tulip is often more valuable than the flower itself. You step out into the street, the chill seeping back into your coat. And as you walk, you find yourself glancing down at your own little bulb again, wondering what story it might someday tell even if it never sees the sun. You don't walk far before you hear it. A cluster of men gathered outside a public house, voices loud, animated, and just a touch too excited for this early in the day. You drift closer, drawn in like a moth to a candle, or in this case, a tulip auction fueled by optimism, beer, and an almost spiritual belief in imaginary profits. The tavern is warm and bustling. Inside, the crowd is mostly tradesmen, brewers, weavers, barge owners, and bakers, elbow to elbow at long tables. But instead of tankards and roasted meat, the tables are covered in slips of paper. Contracts, ledgers, lists of tulip bulb trades written in looping Dutch script. Some are inked hastily, others decorated like miniature treaties. You spot a few coins changing hands, but mostly it's just paper and promises. A man in the center, wearing a wine-colored doublet and a feathered cap far too large for his head, stands on a stool and shouts, "1 asterisk Switzers. 5 guilders. Anyone?" He waves a sheet of paper over his head like it might catch flight. You have no idea what a Switzers is, but judging by the gasps around you, it's apparently very important. This is the heart of what historians now call tulip mania, and you're standing right in the middle of it. No flower in sight. This isn't a flower market, it's a futures market. Traders are buying and selling bulbs that won't be harvested for months, based on predictions of their future rarity and bloom. And the best part? You don't need to physically possess the bulb to sell it. You can sell the promise of it, then sell that promise again, and again. It's like passing around an empty envelope and agreeing that it's worth a house. You take a seat near a group discussing a bulb called Admiral van der Eyck. One man claims he bought a share of it last week for 20 guilders and already flipped it for 35. Another shakes his head, swearing his cousin made 400 in a day, enough to buy a horse, a sleigh, and 2 barrels of herring. You raise an eyebrow. They nod solemnly. This is how it starts. A whisper here, a rumor there. A handful of real transactions that fuel the illusion that everyone can get rich as long as they buy in now. By the time anyone questions the logic, they've already sold their tools, their furniture, maybe even a plot of land to get in on the game. One man scribbles on a scrap of parchment and offers it to another. "Half a viceroy due next February," he says. The other man accepts it like he's been handed a deed to the moon. Historians still argue whether this was truly irrational behavior or a temporary shared illusion that made sense, sort of, in the specific economy of the time. After all, the Dutch Republic was booming. Trade was exploding. People had disposable income and a deep cultural interest in beauty, novelty, and prestige. Why not pour your wealth into petals? You overhear a brewer boasting that he traded his delivery wagon and 6 barrels of ale for 2 bulbs, neither of which he's seen. "They're growing in Haarlem," he says with pride. "In a secret garden." You don't ask why the garden is secret. You already know. If no one sees the bulb, no one can say it doesn't exist. At a corner table, a quiet man with ink-stained hands slides a printed pamphlet your way. It reads, Speculative Blumenhandel, a guide to tulip fortunes. You flip through it. It's half gardening advice, half investment strategy. There are charts, graphs, suggested pairings like a wine list, pair Gouda Flame, with bold burgundy walls and understated despair. You smile. Because the joke's not entirely a joke. In this tavern, it's clear that tulips have gone from curiosity to currency. And there's a fever in the air, a giddy, contagious energy that tells every person in this room, you're one bulb away from freedom. Or ruin. The barkeep yells over the crowd, last call for Generalissimo. Final bid. Someone at the back waves a ledger. 80. The room erupts. You glance at your little wrapped bulb again. It's not even part of this madness yet. But you can already feel the weight of it in your pocket, like it might be worth something. Maybe a lot. As the tavern grows louder, so do the dreams. One man speaks of quitting work altogether. Another of building a house in the countryside with nothing but tulip profits. And a third whispers a secret. I bought one with black petals. Black. Like midnight. You don't know if that's possible. No one does. But in this world, the story is as valuable as the bloom. As you leave, you pass a sign scrawled in chalk outside the door. Tonight's special, herring and hope. 2 guilders. Feels accurate. The street is dark now. You walk slowly, passing shadowy windows where silhouettes lean over desks, counting money, scribbling names, and whispering tulips to themselves like bedtime prayers. By the time the next morning rolls around, you've already heard 3 different rumors about a bulb being traded for an entire bakery. One version says the bakery was in Delft. Another says it came with a horse and 2 unpaid apprentices. Yet another insists the whole thing was a prank by a cheese merchant. You don't know what's true anymore. But one thing is clear. Tulips are no longer just flowers, they're speculative gold. You find yourself walking toward a quieter part of the city where an informal gathering is taking place in the back room of a spice shop. No signs, no advertising. But people know. You slip in through the back, greeted by the sweet scent of cinnamon and the faint sound of quills scratching parchment. Here, candlelight flickers over faces deep in negotiation. There are no raised voices. No shouts. Just soft murmurs, slow nods and careful handwriting. A man folds a small contract with reverence and tucks it into his sleeve like a wedding vow. This is not the chaos of the tavern. This is the next evolution of the trade. Quiet, organized, lucrative. Here, bulbs aren't just being flipped. They're being reserved, with clauses and clauses about future blooms, seasonal conditions, and delivery discretion. You sit beside a merchant named Klaus, who explains the new system, options. You don't buy the bulb. You buy the right to buy it later at a fixed price. You blink. And if the price drops? He shrugs. You don't buy it. You lose the fee, that's all. You realize this is getting even more abstract. People aren't trading bulbs anymore. They're trading paper about bulbs they'll never touch. The object itself, this little clump of plant flesh, is vanishing under layers of speculation. Klaus shows you a tiny ledger full of carefully ruled columns. One bulb, Admiral Liefde, has been bought and sold 8 times in the past 3 days. The bulb itself? Still in a garden outside Haarlem. This is where things begin to feel like a game. And like any good game, there are rules, etiquette, and of course winners. But also losers. You hear whispers about a miller who traded away his family's savings for a rare bulb that turned out to be mislabeled. About a brewer who bought 10 non-existent bulbs from a man who vanished the next day. About a widow who sold her late husband's tools to get in on a sure thing, only to find the contract meant nothing. Historians still argue whether these stories were widespread or merely exaggerated cautionary tales. Were most people just dabbling with spare change? Or did real families lose real fortunes chasing flower-stamped dreams? The records are murky. But the sense of collective obsession? That part is clear. You glance down the table. One man, a shipbuilder, quietly calculates whether to sell part of his dock to secure a share of a striped tulip rumored to bloom with midnight centers and gold-tipped flames. He sketches what he imagines it will look like, even though no one's ever seen it bloom. His wife stands behind him, arms crossed, unimpressed. In another corner, two young men trade contract slips like schoolboys with playing cards. They giggle. One draws a tulip on his paper with a little face and a crown. And at the far end, a woman in a plain dress calmly tallies today's bulb movements on a wooden abacus. Her fingers never stop moving. Klaus leans in and murmurs, "She's made more than any of us." Keeps it quiet. Never even sees the flowers. You step outside again, blinking at the overcast sky. Tulips, those silent, patient things, are now at the center of an entire shadow economy. One that lives not in fields or vases but in ideas. And yet, not everyone is here for the profits. You're invited later that afternoon to a different sort of gathering, this time in a candlelit home near the university. The room is filled with long-bearded scholars, thin as rakes and twice as dry. They drink tea and argue about whether tulips symbolize eternity, vanity, or simply seasonal confusion. One man insists that tulips reflect the transience of beauty. Another argues they represent the folly of humankind's desire to own nature. A third, much younger, just says, "I like the purple ones." You smile. Finally, some honesty. One scholar shows you a woodcut of a tulip with impossibly intricate petals. "The artists exaggerate them, you know," he says. "Makes them more valuable." Another adds, "The value's in the idea. What it might be." You realize that even in this room of philosophers and professors, the fever has caught hold. Not through greed but through symbolism. Even the skeptics can't look away. And perhaps that's what makes this moment so quietly strange. The economy isn't just powered by tulip lust, it's buoyed by dreams, metaphors, aesthetics, and occasionally the desperate hope that beauty might actually be something you can own. Back in your room that evening, you unroll the little cloth from your pocket. Your own bulb rests there, silent, knobby, unimpressive. But somehow, heavier now. You set it on the windowsill again, watching the night fold over the rooftops. Outside, Amsterdam glows with candlelight and quiet ambition. And somewhere, someone's just made a trade for a flower they'll never touch, in the hope that it will bloom into something no one's ever seen. The next few days move in a blur of candles, contracts, and conversations that all seem to orbit the same floral sun. You start to feel the rhythm of it, the strange, almost musical pattern of how people speak about tulips now. There are tones of reverence, whiffs of excitement, and just under the surface, a tremor of panic. Today you're back in the beer halls. Not the rowdy, chaotic ones of your earlier visit, but the quieter haunts, where serious traders gather beneath low ceilings to haggle over increasingly imaginary things. A man sits beside you with ink-stained fingers and a nervous twitch in his left eye. He introduces himself only as Bram. He orders 2 beers, one for himself, one for Courage, and then unrolls a small sheet of paper. You glance down. It's a bulb certificate. Except this one has been folded and refolded so many times that the ink has smudged and the edges have curled. The bulb's name, once written in proud, decorative script, is now barely legible. You squint, Aurora's whisper. He leans closer. "I've sold this one 7 times, he whispers. You blink. "And who owns it now?" He shrugs, takes a long sip. "Hard to say." You realize what's happening here. Multiple people now believe they own the same tulip. Bram has been, perhaps deliberately, reselling rights to a bulb that, as far as you can tell, may not even exist. And he's not alone. This practice is becoming so common that it has a name: chain selling, where one contract is stacked upon another like pancakes made of hope and denial. You ask him what happens when the bulb is finally harvested. He smiles tightly. "Well, let's just hope no one's paying attention by then. It's not malicious necessarily. Most people are just swept up in the momentum. They want to believe. They want the tulip to bloom, to dazzle, to justify everything. You walk from table to table, overhearing more of the same. One man confesses he's traded a goat, a mirror, and a winter coat for a bulb that might have striped petals. A carpenter, already 3 drinks in, brags about flipping a non-existent tulip drawing. Yes, just a drawing, for 2 actual chairs and a bucket of nails. You pause. Wait, the flower wasn't even real? He shakes his head proudly. No. But the drawing was very persuasive. You can't help but laugh. He laughs too. The mood in the room is buoyant. Delusional maybe, but still somehow cheerful. It's as though the entire city has collectively decided. We will pretend this makes sense until it doesn't. Historians still argue whether this phase, the speculative crescendo, was driven by genuine belief or just social inertia. Were people convinced tulips were inherently worth their weight in gold? Or were they just too deep in the game to stop playing? There's one corner of the room, though, where the mood is different. A man sits alone with his ledger open, pages covered in tiny numbers. He's an accountant, or perhaps a merchant with too much conscience. He taps the quill against the table. You approach. I don't see how the math works, he mutters, mostly to himself. The price per bulb has tripled this month. But none of them have bloomed yet. You ask what he means. They're trading shadows, he says quietly. At some point, someone's going to ask for light. That night, you walk along the canal thinking about those words. Trading shadows. You look down at the water, at the way the lanterns flicker across the surface. Bright and beautiful, but you can't touch them. Just reflections. Just illusions. You visit a friend of Peter's the next morning. Another grower, this one more commercial. His name is Joost, and he runs a small tulip farm just outside the city. The fields are quiet this time of year. Rows of soil wait patiently for spring. Joost doesn't trade futures. He doesn't dabble in contracts or options. He just grows. He shows you his bulb stores, wooden shelves stacked with earthy parcels wrapped in straw. These, he says, will bloom. Most of them anyway. You ask him if he's tempted to sell into the frenzy. He shrugs. Sometimes. But I like planting more than promising. You watch as he gently brushes soil from a bulb. There's something calming about it. Honest even. Here is a man who waits months for results, while the city races ahead in circles chasing pieces of paper. And you start to wonder, when does speculation become fiction? At what point does the story outgrow the flower? As you head back into Amsterdam, the contrast feels sharper than ever. You pass a group of apprentices arguing over whether a certain red and white striped bulb is worth more than a diamond ring. One of them insists he heard it could make a man a magistrate. A magistrate. From a flower. You sigh. Because even if you know how this ends, and maybe you do, you can't help but admire the drama of it. The beauty. The sheer commitment. It's not just a bubble. It's a ballet. Carefully choreographed, emotionally charged, and heading, possibly, toward collapse. But for now, Amsterdam dances. The candlelit world you've wandered into is starting to feel a bit surreal. Tonight, you find yourself at a house party. Not the raucous kind with music and spilled wine, but the sort where powdered wigs are adjusted every few minutes, and the biggest drama of the evening is someone arriving with a new tulip sketch. Your host is a man named Hendrik. He's a banker by trade, but you'd never guess it from the way he speaks about bulbs. This one, he says, showing you a tiny framed drawing, is rumored to bloom with edges like frostbite. You don't question it. Of course it is. The room is filled with people sipping warm spiced wine and whispering in corners. No one talks about politics or religion or the weather. They talk about tulips. What they saw in Haarlem. What they heard someone grew in Alkmaar. What might be blooming next season. One woman says she knows a man who's growing a bulb, so rare, it could make you forget your debts. You're not sure if that's poetry or investment advice. On a small writing desk, guests are jotting down new names for imagined tulips. There's a list. Silent fire. Lips of April. The widow's blush. Gold trembles. Someone writes, the philosopher's flame, and everyone in the room pauses. A few gasp. You nod respectfully. That's a good one. It's all so delicate and ridiculous and somehow completely enchanting. This is no longer about money, not directly. This is about imagination. About prestige. About being known as someone who knows the next big thing, even if that thing is a flower that may never exist. And as the night wears on, you begin to see that this moment, this strange dreamy bubble, is as much about social identity as it is about petals or profit. Historians still debate whether this was truly mania in the pathological sense. Was it greed? Was it collective delusion? Or was it simply people finding meaning in something harmless and beautiful, until it wasn't? You drift toward the study, where three men are hunched over a ledger the size of a dinner tray. One traces bulb names with his finger like a priest reciting liturgy. They've invented a ranking system. Rarity, beauty, bloom precision, and of course narrative potential. Because now, a tulip isn't just valuable if it's rare. It has to have a good story. One bulb, Eclipsa alba, is said to have been saved from a shipwreck, dried in a nun's apron and planted beneath a monastery bell tower. There's no evidence for this. Doesn't matter. It gets a 9.5 for drama. Another bulb, Weeping Mercury, supposedly bloomed only at midnight. Someone asks if that's even possible. The others shush him. You wonder if you're the only one still pretending to be confused. Everyone else seems perfectly content in this paper garden they've built together. Delicate, whisper-thin, and shimmering with possibility. As you leave the house, the cold air hits you like a splash of water. You hear laughter trailing behind you, muffled through the heavy doors. Somewhere, a carriage rattles down a cobbled street, its wheels echoing like a ticking clock. You pass a window and catch a glimpse of a family, father, mother, two children, gathered around a bulb wrapped in linen. It sits in a bowl like a relic. The father explains something to the children, pointing at a hand-drawn diagram of how the petals might look. You wonder what those children will remember. In the coming days you see more of the same. A woman trades a silver spoon for a half share in a Rosa vulgaris. A priest whispers that someone offered him 2 rare bulbs as penance. A butcher claims he sold a single petal, just one, for enough cloth to make a wedding dress. At the docks, you meet a sailor who confesses he smuggled bulbs in his socks. The soft ones travel best, he says. At this point you're not even surprised. Everywhere you go, people speak in bulb names more than numbers. They quote petal colors like prophecies. There's a sense that something is coming, some grand unveiling. Not just a bloom but a cultural crescendo. As if the entire city is holding its breath. But beneath the surface you feel it, tension. Like a string pulled just a little too tight. You overhear one man mutter, "It can't go on like this." His friend replies, "Why not?" And that really is the question. Why not believe in a world where tulips are worth fortunes? Why not imagine petals like fire and frost and velvet night? Why not drink warm wine and dream by candlelight? For now, Amsterdam is still dreaming. And somewhere in a dark cupboard your own little bulb waits, unspectacular, unbloomed but suddenly precious. A fog thicker than usual rolls over the canal this morning, and it hangs low, heavy, like a warning no one wants to read. But the tulip business rolls on, immune to weather, reason, and restraint. You've been invited to meet someone different today. Not a grower, not a collector, not a paper-swapping speculator, but a man who's become, by accident or ambition, a legend of the trade. His name is Joris, and he once sold his family's ancestral farmland for a single Semper Augustus bulb. He invites you into his modest home with a nervous smile and offers you a cup of weak coffee. The land had been in the family for 3 generations, he says as you settle into a worn chair near the fireplace. But the bulb, oh the bulb, they said it had purple tongues and golden tears. You don't ask who they were. By now you know. They are the whispers in every tavern, the men in feathered hats, the scribblers at the back of the beer hall. He speaks gently without bitterness. Just a strange sort of awe. It never bloomed, he says. He lifts the lid of a small wooden box and shows you the shriveled remains. A husk. A faint whiff of mold. It died the first winter, he shrugs. Too much damp. You ask him what he did then. I bought another, he says. You blink. And another after that. You suddenly understand. Joris isn't an investor. He's a believer. And believers, once burned, don't always back away, they double down. Tulips became his story, his identity, his religion. They were his way of saying, I was part of something. Historians still argue whether people like Joris were the exception or the rule. Was he a cautionary tale? Or the poster child for a generation swept up in a dream too fragrant to resist? He shows you a small leather-bound notebook filled with tulip names he invented himself. Luna Mortua. Silent Apology. Breadless Spring. He smiles a little sadly. They never existed. But they kept me company. As you walk the city afterward, his words follow you like footsteps. And then, almost like a whisper in your ear, you hear a different sort of murmur in the market. A new name. The Ghost Tulip. Someone in Harlem, according to rumor, has bred a tulip that blooms white in darkness, like a pale flame. No proof, of course. Just a few sketches, a vague letter, and a promise that its petals shimmer like silk left in moonlight. You ask around. No one's seen it. But someone knows someone who might have touched a bulb from the same batch. This, you realize, is how it spreads. The story moves faster than the plant ever could. And by the time anyone demands evidence, there's already a price. In the next tavern, a young man slams down a contract. Half of a ghost tulip, he declares. The room erupts. No one questions it. You step outside, wind pressing into your coat, and wonder how long this can continue. How many layers of dream can be stacked on top of each other before the base crumbles? You pass a window and see a woman cradling a bulb like an infant. She whispers to it. Maybe prayer. Maybe madness. You don't judge. But then you see something that stops you cold. A shopkeeper. You've seen him before, cheerful and chatty, is closing early. He pulls down the shutters, locks the door, and pins a sign to the window. Gone to Harlem. One last trade. The handwriting is rushed. There's a smudge where he pressed too hard. You don't know what he's trading. Or for whom. Or why he looks like he hasn't slept in days. But you know this, people are starting to chase ghosts. Inside another cafe, you hear a woman mutter, if I can just get one ghost tulip, I can retire. Her friend nods. There's no way they'll get cheaper. You sit quietly and sip lukewarm tea, feeling the tension rise like steam. No one says it out loud, but the question is starting to form in the corners of their eyes. What if the next person doesn't want to buy? For now they keep trading. They keep naming. They keep dreaming. Because the alternative, that this whole thing is made of mist and paper and fevered hope, is too sharp to look at directly. You return to your room that night and unwrap your bulb again. It hasn't changed. Still firm, still silent. You place it beside a candle and watch the shadow it casts on the wall. Briefly, just for a second, the shape looks almost like a flame. And then the wick flickers and the shape disappears. You wake the next morning to the sound of carts rattling over cobblestones and the faint toll of a church bell. The city feels tense. Still beautiful, still humming with activity, but quieter somehow. Like everyone is holding their breath. You make your way to a familiar street where the bulb exchange meets. An informal square of taverns, cloth stalls, and backroom deals. But today something's different. No shouting. No raised contracts. Just silence and the sound of feet shuffling on cold stone. A young man stands near the tavern doorway, eyes darting, clutching a slip of parchment. Anyone want a share in a sultan's flame? He mutters. Half price. Even less. No one answers. You watch as he tries again with a different group and again gets nothing. Just polite nods and averted eyes. And then you feel it. That change. That moment where something breaks, not with a bang but a whimper. The market hasn't collapsed, not officially. But it's hesitating, stalling, shrinking. People aren't buying. You duck into the tavern, the same one where you first watched the traders shout and scribble and cheer. The tables are half empty. A few regulars sip their drinks in silence. The chalkboard above the bar still reads, "Latest bulb prices, updated hourly." But today the numbers haven't changed. You overhear snippets of quiet conversation. They say the Harlem auction fell flat yesterday. No one bid on a Viceroy. Not one. I heard someone tried to trade a full Semper Augustus for a cow and got turned down. You order a beer just to have something to hold. The barkeep shrugs. "Same as yesterday?" he says, voice low. You nod. Across the room, a man is staring at a pile of papers, rubbing his temples. You recognize him. He was loud last week, cracking jokes, closing deals. Today he's pale and quiet. You glance over his shoulder. They're all unsold contracts. One of them, written in an elegant, sweeping hand, promises a bulb called Lucerna tempestatus, said to bloom with petals like storm clouds. You remember that one. Someone claimed it glowed faintly under starlight. Today it's worth nothing. Outside you walk the length of the canal. There's a merchant burning papers in a barrel. The smoke curls upward, faintly scented with ink and dried flower oil. You ask him what he's doing. "Cleaning house," he says. "These contracts are worth less than kindling." You glance down and catch a name before it turns to ash, crescendo of spring. Historians still argue whether the crash was sudden or gradual. Whether it began with one failed auction or with too many people trying to sell at the same time. Some blame Harlem. Some blame the lawyers. Some even blame the weather. Too damp for good bulbs, they say, as if drizzle could break an economy. But whatever caused it, the effects are rippling fast. You visit a tradesman who'd been renting out viewing appointments for a supposedly rare tulip. He's gone. His house is boarded up. The bulb, if it ever existed, is nowhere to be found. Another man admits he traded his entire year's inventory for a flower that turned out to be a mislabeled common red. He shows you the receipt, tears in his eyes, then laughs. "At least it bloomed," he says. Most of them don't. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Even the bulbs that do bloom can't live up to the promises. How could they? They've been wrapped in stories for too long. You pass a print shop, where pamphlets are being hastily produced. One headline reads, "The Tulip Delusion, How We Let Flowers Ruin Us." Another, "Protect Your Household, Trust No Bulb." You sigh, because this was never really about the tulips. It was about hope. About the belief that something beautiful and rare could change your life. That you could dig wealth out of dirt. That you too could win the bloom lottery. Now the city is beginning to wake up from that dream. And it's not gentle. In the alley behind the spice shop, you see two men arguing, not loudly but with that tense, quiet edge that comes before something breaks. One demands repayment. The other offers a sack of bulbs in exchange. The first man just laughs. No one wants them now. You keep walking. Even the names feel different now. You hear someone mention Whispering Swan and Velvet Judgment, and where once you might have leaned in with curiosity, now they sound like punchlines. Like ghosts of a party everyone's pretending didn't happen. And yet, here and there, you spot stubborn traces of belief. A girl with ink-stained fingers sitting beside a canal, sketching a tulip with 5 colors, one that doesn't exist. A baker who still keeps a bulb in a glass jar on his shelf, even if no one asks about it anymore. And you, still carrying that little bulb, still unplanted. You pull it from your pocket and hold it up to the afternoon light. It's just a bulb. Rough, dusty, quiet, but it's real. And in a city learning the hard way that not all things can be bought and sold on promises, that might be enough. The fog doesn't lift the next morning. If anything, it thickens, both in the air and in the mood that now coats the city. You can feel it in the foot traffic, in the slower way people nod hello, in how conversations trail off instead of picking up steam. You pass the bulb exchange again, that once boisterous square of dreams and promises. It's nearly silent now. A few traders loiter near doorways, shuffling their feet, pretending to still be in the game. One man stands beside a small chalkboard, the words, "Willing to buy, but not for fantasy prices." You don't know whether to laugh or weep. You hear that Haarlem is officially suspending auctions. A few courts in Amsterdam are being petitioned by buyers who want to back out of bulb contracts. But legally? It's messy. None of it was regulated. Most of it was verbal. Tulips, it seems, have finally outgrown even the law's patience. Today you meet Marin, a florist by trade. Not a grower. Not a trader. Just a man who once made modest living crafting tulip bouquets for merchants' daughters and spring festivals. You find him in his shop, seated behind a dusty counter, surrounded by pots that haven't seen water in weeks. "I didn't trade," he says, "but I benefited." His hands run along a wooden box filled with dried petals, colors faded but still delicate. Orders doubled, tripled. Everyone wanted arrangements for their investment reveals. He chuckles at the phrase. They'd host parties just to show off what a bulb might become. "I sold empty vases for more than I used to make in a week." You ask how business is now. He gestures around at the quiet room. A single tulip blooms in the window, its stem bowed slightly like it knows better. "I'm back to real flowers now," he says. "And that's fine." Out on the canal, you overhear two young boys pretending to trade bulbs. "I'll give you 3 ghost tulips for your shoes," one says. The other pauses. Ghost tulips aren't worth anything anymore. A beat of silence. "Okay," the first boy says. 2 ghost tulips and my mother's pie." They both laugh and run off, leaving behind the sound of small feet on wet stone. Even the children are adapting. Historians still debate what caused the final collapse. Was it mass panic? Overproduction? Market saturation? A lack of new buyers? Or perhaps, just the creeping realization that a flower can't live up to the weight of 1,000 stories? You walk past a merchant sitting beside a crate of bulbs, holding a hand-painted sign. "Real. Planted. Bloomed." It sounds less like a sales pitch and more like an apology. The city is not rioting. There are no mobs. No torches. No dramatic public reckonings. That would make more sense, perhaps. But the truth is quieter. It looks like men stepping out of taverns with empty satchels. It sounds like women tearing up contracts and throwing them into the fire without ceremony. It feels like silence in places that used to buzz. And still, some are clinging. You meet one man, Hans, in a cluttered attic room, hunched over a desk covered in sketches. He tells you he's working on a book, The Lost Blooms of the Golden Age. He wants to catalog all the legendary tulips of the past few years. The ones that never bloomed or bloomed wrong or never existed at all. He flips through pages. Cinder Shade. Gilded Regret. Star of Weeping. His pencil lines are delicate, reverent. "I want to remember them," he says, "even if they were fake." You ask why. "Because we believed in them," he says. And sometimes that's worth recording. You walk home with his words in your head. Because it's true, isn't it? This strange floral fever, this manic devotion to stripes and colors and names, it wasn't just greed. It was also wonder, desire. The deeply human longing to touch something rare, to be part of a moment, to find meaning in the unpredictable bloom of life. And though the money is gone, the stories remain. You pass Magdalena's townhouse again. The windows are shuttered. Her prized Semper Augustus no longer sits in the window. But in the doorway, someone has left a single red tulip in a glass jar. No label. No name. Just a flower. You reach your room that night and unwrap your own bulb once more. You cradle it in your palm, now familiar, no longer mysterious. It hasn't made you rich. It hasn't bloomed. But it's still here. And in a city that's finally waking from a long, petal-scented dream, that counts for something. There's a damp chill in the air this morning, the kind that seems to seep through wood and cloth and bone. It fits the mood perfectly. Amsterdam, once giddy with tulip euphoria, now walks with slower feet and speaks with quieter voices. You find yourself at the site of an auction. Well, what used to be an auction. The open square has been swept clean, and the wooden platform where bulbs were once paraded like royalty has been taken down. A few nails remain in the cobblestones, crooked like they too have given up. No one's buying today. But a few people are watching. You recognize one or two traders from earlier in your journey. Their hats are a little more worn now, their coats a little more threadbare. They glance at each other occasionally, but no one says much. It's as if they're all attending the funeral of an idea. You sit on a low wall nearby and just observe. Over time, you notice a slow trickle of people entering a narrow side door, disappearing into a small building that once served as a legal office. You decide to follow. Inside you find a courtroom, not a grand one, but an administrative space filled with stacks of parchment and the sound of disgruntled whispers. This is where it gets technical. Because now that the tulip bubble has burst, people are trying to unburst their losses. You watch as a man presents a stack of bulb contracts to a clerk. These were never meant to be binding, he says. Everyone understood it was speculative. The clerk doesn't blink. You sign them. Another man, red-faced, arms crossed, leans forward. They sold me a blighted bulb. It bloomed brown. The clerk says. And what did your contract promise? The man falters. That it might bloom blue. There's no laughter. No mockery. Just paperwork and the slow churn of people trying to rewrite a fantasy into something legally legible. Historians still argue whether the Dutch government ever formally intervened in the tulip collapse. Some say officials tried to annul certain contracts. Others argue the legal system quietly ignored most claims, hoping the storm would pass on its own. From the looks of this office, the second version feels more likely. You sit through another case. This one involves a merchant who sold a half share of a tulip that no longer exists. The bulb was lost in a shipping accident, or so he claims. The buyer wants reimbursement. The clerk listens, expressionless. Do you have the bulb? No. Do you have proof it existed? The man hesitates. I had a drawing. The clerk sighs and motions for the next case. You step outside, the air somehow colder now, and head toward the port. The docks are quieter than before. Fewer ships arriving, fewer goods being traded. Tulips had become an odd sort of trade item, not just in money but in the confidence of commerce. Now that confidence is wilting. A sailor near the docks tells you that entire crates of bulbs are being left unclaimed. Too expensive to move. Too worthless to keep. He shrugs. You watch him pry open a crate. Inside are dozens of bulbs, all carefully wrapped, labeled in ink that's starting to run. He holds one up, crimson eclipse. He snorts. Looks like a turnip. You ask what they'll do with them. He shrugs again. Plant them maybe. Sell them to florists. Feed some to pigs. You blink. Tulips can be fed to pigs? He grins. They don't care what it cost last month. And maybe that's the core of it. Tulips, for all their stories and symbols and prices, are still just bulbs. Living things. They bloom or they don't. They grow or they rot. They don't care what we name them or how many coins changed hands for their future. You walk along the pier and find a few crates already smashed open, their contents scattered. Some bulbs are intact. Others crushed underfoot. One rolls toward you and you pick it up without thinking. It's small, firm, covered in dirt. The label is gone. Just a bulb now. Just potential. Later that afternoon, you return to Peter's garden. You half expect it to be overgrown or empty, but he's there, kneeling beside a row of pots, humming to himself. He looks up as you approach. Back to see if they've bloomed yet? You smile. Any luck? He shrugs, brushing soil from his hands. Some not. That's the thing with bulbs. They don't care about stories. just water and patience. You sit beside him on the low garden wall and watch as he tends to each pot gently, not as an investor but as a caretaker. "I sold one a few months ago," he says. "A Flamma Vespera. Never bloomed. Buyer was furious. Said I ruined him." You ask if he felt guilty. He shakes his head. "I didn't name it Flamma Vespera." "You did." You stay until the light begins to fade. The sun slips behind rooftops, casting long shadows over the garden. The bulbs sit quietly in their pots, unaware of the city's hopes, its fears, its paper markets and broken dreams. They'll bloom when they're ready. Or they won't. Either way, the earth will keep turning. By now the bloom has faded, not just from the tulips but from the entire city. You wake to a quieter Amsterdam. Less bustle. Fewer whispered deals. And for the first time in weeks, you hear someone actually talking about fish prices instead of petal stripes. You make your way down to one of the city's many residential lanes, rows of narrow houses, stoic and slanted, with high windows and aging shutters. It's here that the aftershocks of the tulip collapse are being felt most acutely, not in the counting houses or courtrooms, but in the quiet spaces in between. Your first stop is a modest home, once owned by a man you met early on, a baker named Willem who'd traded nearly his entire spring inventory for a supposed half-bulb share in a silver glory. You remember the sparkle in his eye when he spoke about it? Today the door swings open slowly. It's Willem's wife. Her smile is polite but tired. Inside, the smell of fresh bread still lingers, but the shelves are bare. "We had to sell the oven," she says softly. You sit for tea in their tiny kitchen. A single tulip painting still hangs on the wall, faded, hand-drawn, and slightly crooked. "Willem won't talk about it," she says. "But he still keeps the contract in his coat pocket. Won't throw it away. It's not rare." You hear the same kind of story again and again. A candle maker sold his entire wax inventory for 3 bulbs. Only one survived the winter. A seamstress traded 6 bolts of imported silk for a promised black August that turned out to be a mislabeled onion. A retired ship captain put half his pension into a bulb that rotted in storage. His daughter now keeps it in a drawer wrapped in cloth, for luck. You begin to realize that tulip loss wasn't just financial. It was emotional. People didn't just lose money, they lost versions of themselves. The hopeful version. The ambitious version. The one who believed that beauty could bloom into freedom. Historians still debate how many were truly ruined. Some argue the damage was overstated, more moral fable than economic collapse. Others insist the real losses were hidden. Pride, trust, friendships strained by unpaid debts and broken contracts. You visit a quiet garden behind a church where a few remaining growers tend their plots. One of them, a man named Sibrand, shows you a tulip catalog he made by hand years ago during the Mania's peak. He flips through the pages with a distant look. "Only half of these ever bloomed," he says. You ask what he did with the others. He closes the book. Buried them. Along with the names. Not all fallout looks like devastation. Some of it just looks like resignation. You pass an old woman sweeping her stoop. She tells you her son bought into the tulip trade and now refuses to speak about it. He says it was a dream, she says. But he doesn't say if it was good or bad. Further down the canal you stumble on a small shop selling gardening tools. It's run by an older couple. The shelves are lined with trowels, seed packets and, surprisingly, bulbs. Real ones. Labeled simply, red, yellow, white. Nothing fancy. No invented Latin. No dramatic names. You ask the man at the counter if he sold bulbs during the craze. He nods once. "We never stopped." You ask how. "We only sold what we planted." No drawings. No promises. You admire the simplicity of it. The quiet rebellion of just growing. Back on the streets, remnants of the old Mania still peek through. A few fading posters, a merchant shouting half-heartedly about discounted spring bulbs, A cracked window displaying a wilted tulip painting behind dusty glass. But even here there are signs of new life. A young girl on the bridge tosses petals into the canal, not to mourn but to play. A painter in a quiet square is sketching a vase of tulips with no labels, just color and shape. And you? You still carry that bulb. You haven't planted it. Not yet. Maybe you've been waiting for the right moment. Or maybe, like so many others, you're still deciding whether it was a gift or a joke from the universe. As the sun sets, you climb a narrow hill overlooking the city, a rare slope in a land so flat, and watch as the rooftops blush under the fading light. The canals mirror the sky in streaks of pink and gray. It's quiet. No auctions. No shouts. No whispered bulb names on the breeze. Just the city breathing again. You think of all the things that bloomed and withered during the mania, names, fortunes, delusions. But also wonder. Imagination. Community. People leaning across tables, comparing drawings of flowers that never existed, laughing about petals that glowed in moonlight. And even now, after all of it, part of you can't help but miss it. Because for a brief time, the world believed in magic wrapped in roots. The next morning feels peaceful. For the first time in weeks, the air doesn't feel like it's buzzing with tension. The canals are still. The shutters creak open slowly. And you notice something odd. People are smiling again, not with the manic gleam of tulip-fueled dreams, but with a kind of worn, genuine softness. You head back toward the center of town, past the old exchange square. It's nearly empty now, save for a couple of vendors trying to pivot into more grounded wares, cheese, bolts of cloth, a hopeful stack of turnips. You chuckle quietly. Even the turnips seem to be breathing easier. At the edge of the square, you find a stall that looks familiar, run by an older woman named Lisbeth. She was once known for hand-painting tulip catalogs with swirling fonts and romantic ink washes. Today her stall is different. No grand names, no shimmering depictions of imaginary blooms. Just a handful of potted tulips. Small. Blooming. Real. They're nothing special, she says, shrugging as you approach. But they're mine. You crouch beside the pots, fingers brushing the cool rim of one. The flower is soft pink, petals curled slightly inward like it's keeping its secrets. You ask her if she misses the old days. She thinks for a moment. I miss the excitement, she says. But not the wait. You nod. That makes sense. As you walk through the quieter city, it becomes clear that people are replanting. Not just bulbs but trust. A bookseller you'd seen once trading bulb shares now has a display of poetry. A spice merchant who once screamed about future flamed petals is back to cinnamon and pepper. A sign in his window, back to what we know. You find a printmaker hanging a fresh sheet in her storefront. A woodcut of a tulip, not overly romantic, not dripping with fantasy. Just clean lines, simple shading. The caption beneath it reads, "A flower at last." You visit the home of an elderly couple known to host tulip-themed salons during the mania. They'd once filled their parlor with paintings, contracts about paintings, and at least 2 busts sculpted in the likeness of bulbs. Now they've transformed that parlor into a reading room. Shelves, tea, quiet music. We still love flowers, the husband says, but we've stopped assigning them futures. You stay for tea. The conversation drifts to books, grandchildren, old love stories. Tulips aren't mentioned once. Historians still reflect on this shift, the slow cultural pivot from florid dreaming back to grounded reality. There was no riot, no ban, no single proclamation. Just a quiet return to the soil. Still, the traces remain. You stumble upon a crumpled contract in a gutter, half soaked in rain. The name on it is Frosted Solace. A week ago, someone might have traded a horse for it. Today it's just paper. You visit Peter again, back in his garden, where the bulbs are slowly, methodically waking up to spring. He doesn't say much. He's humming again. You ask how they're doing. He gestures to a pot. This one bloomed crooked, he says with a smile. But it's trying. You stay and help him water the rose, cool water from a wooden pail, splashing softly against dark soil. Feels good to do something real. Later you walk the outer edges of town and come across a small patch of wild tulips. No owners, no names, just growing where they please. They lean toward the sun like they've never heard of speculation. You sit nearby and watch as bees drift lazily between the blooms. You think of Eurus and his shriveled Semper Augustus. Of Magdalena and her empty parlor window. Of children trading imaginary bulbs on bridges. Of the man in the beer hall who once tried to sell you half a flower he hadn't seen bloom. Of yourself, cradling a knobby, nameless bulb for weeks. You pull it from your coat. Still firm. Still dusty. You dig a shallow hole beside the wild tulips and press it gently into the soil. Cover it. Pat it. Sit back. Maybe it will bloom. Maybe not. But at least now, it has a chance to be what it is, rather than what everyone once said it could be. It rains lightly the next day, a gentle whispering rain that doesn't soak so much as it lingers. The canals darken, the stones gleam, and the city feels as though it's been rinsed of something heavy. You walk without aim, letting your feet carry you through narrow alleys and over small bridges, past crooked windows and flower boxes beginning to wake up to spring. The tulips are still there, of course they are, but now they grow quietly, unannounced. They bloom in forgotten corners, modest beds, and public gardens with no names pinned to their stems. You stop by the home of Klaus, the once confident trader who had been flipping bulb contracts like pancakes. You remember his little ledger, his excitement over options. Today he answers the door in shirt sleeves, looking softer, more still. "Do you want to see something?" he asks. You nod, and he leads you to his back room, not the one filled with bulb contracts and ledgers, but a smaller room, dusty and sunlit. On the windowsill, a single tulip blooms. Not spectacular. Not monstrous in rarity. Just pale orange, petals slightly frayed, a little too eager in its lean toward the light. "I found the real one," Klaus says quietly. "I planted it. Just to see." You ask if it was worth it. He shrugs. "I think I like it more now that it didn't make me rich." You sit together, watching the flower tremble slightly in the breeze. Elsewhere in the city, a local guild has hosted a public lecture. Lessons from the tulip years. You sneak into the back row. The speaker, a middle-aged scholar in a wool coat, uses phrases like market psychology and inflated demand mechanisms, but no one in the audience seems angry. They listen. Some nod. Some yawn. One man sketches a tulip in the margins of his program. Old habits. Afterward, a student raises her hand. "Do you think it could happen again?" The lecturer pauses. "It always can," he says. "But maybe not with flowers next time." You walk the city again that evening, noticing how many windows now hold real flowers. Not drawings. Not fabled hybrids. Just tulips. Growing. Blooming. Being. You pass a wall covered in old paper, now softened by rain. Flyers. Trade sheets. Half-legible bulb contracts, their ink running down the brick like melted dreams. One scrap flutters loose and lands at your feet. It reads, "One share in the fire that weeps, available immediately." You fold it gently and place it in your coat pocket. Not as a receipt, as a souvenir. Because it's starting to dawn on you, what Amsterdam mourns now isn't the money or even the bulbs, it's the belief. The wild, joyous confidence that something unseen could become something transcendent. But belief has seasons too. And maybe it needs to wilt sometimes so it can bloom again differently. At the bakery, Willem is kneading dough again. Flour dusts his apron. He looks up and waves you in. He has no tulips on display. But he does have fresh loaves, warm from the oven, with little hand-drawn flourishes of petal shapes on the crust. He calls them blown brood, flour bread. "They're silly," he says. "But people like silly." You nod. "We do." You sit on the stoop outside with your warm bread and listen to the soft city sounds. Canal water lapping gently. A distant horse cart. church bells muffled by drizzle. And behind it all, the hum of a place that is beginning to live again without illusions. Tulips still bloom. But no one shouts their names anymore. And maybe that's for the best. Later that evening you return to the edge of the city where you planted your bulb. The patch of earth is damp, the air sweet. You crouch, running a finger through the soil, and notice the faintest push of green rising from the ground. Just a shoot. Just a beginning. It might be your imagination. Or it might be something real. Either way, you sit with it until the stars come out, soft and distant and utterly silent. Morning arrives slowly. The sky is pale, the breeze cool, and Amsterdam seems to breathe more deeply than it has in a long while. The tulip craze is over, but the city hasn't collapsed. It simply shifted. People still rise early, still bake bread, still haggle at markets, still trim their candles in their gardens. But now they do it without the fever. You decide to take one last quiet walk through the city. Your feet carry you past familiar places. The beer hall now half empty but still serving, the garden where Peter hums as he tends his rose, the canal bridges where the boldest trades once occurred with wine-drenched bravado. Everything is softer now. The echoes of tulip dreams still linger, like the scent of a flower long past bloom, but they don't command the air anymore. You pass a small crowd gathered near the university. A professor is reading aloud from a new satirical pamphlet. The Pedigree of the Petal, a brief history of things that never were. The crowd chuckles. Someone shouts, "Read the bit about the goat trade," and laughter spreads like spring wind. They laugh at it now, this odd moment of collective belief. That's how you know the spell has finally broken. At the harbor, crates are being loaded with spices and silks, real goods. Men shout measurements, argue over weights and tariffs. Not a tulip in sight. You ask one dock worker if anyone still trades bulbs. He scratches his chin. Maybe in Harlem, he says, but only the sane ones. You nod and walk on. You visit the city gardens, public now, dotted with new spring growth. And yes, tulips. Modest ones. White, red, soft yellow. No names, no stories. Just growing. One has fallen over slightly in the wind. You straighten it gently, press the soil down around it, and feel something settle in you too. At your final stop, you return to the patch of earth where your bulb was buried. You kneel, brush away a bit of soil. And there it is. A single, curved green sprout, no more than a finger's length. Pale, determined, alive. You sit beside it for a while, just watching. It may not become a Semper Augustus. It may not glow under starlight or drip color like flame. But it's yours. Planted not for profit, but out of quiet wonder. It will grow or it won't. But at least it was given the chance. You pull out a small scrap of paper, the last contract you ever accepted, the one that offered 1/3 share in a Viceroy, sight unseen, delivery pending bloom. You fold it carefully, tear it in half, then again, and place the pieces back in your pocket. Not to forget, but to let go. And as you rise, brush the dirt from your coat, and turn toward home, the city begins to exhale around you. The mania has ended. But spring is just beginning. Wind down, 300 words. So now, as we close our eyes and leave behind 17th century Amsterdam, let yourself feel the rhythm of the city softening in your mind. The footsteps fade. The canal ripples flatten. The market chatter dissolves into the hush of twilight. What remains are simple things. Earth, bulbs, light rain tapping rooftops, and the quiet pulse of something real beneath your feet. Maybe what the tulip mania reminds us, beyond its cautionary tale of speculation and frenzy, is that not everything needs to bloom into greatness to be beautiful. That sometimes the things we believe in are not failures when they fade, they're just seasons passing through. And if you've held on to something for too long, an idea, a worry, an old dream, it's okay to let it rest now. Not with regret, but with the same calm that follows rain. The world moves forward. And so do you. Tonight, let that thought settle with you. You've wandered through candlelight and ledgers, gardens and ghost stories. You've watched people believe in petals and you've seen them begin again. Now breathe in slowly. Exhale even slower. Maybe imagine the soft weight of a bulb in your palm, quiet, dormant, holding nothing more than the possibility of bloom. Let that possibility stay with you as you drift off. You're safe. You're warm. And the world, like the soil in spring, is still capable of growing new things. Sleep well.